All right, young scholars, this week we are focusing on PHP and forms. We're going to cover how they help us create better looking forms than HTML and JavaScript alone allow us for. And it's mainly used for security purposes because when you use PHP code, it does not allow you to view all of the HTML. Well, it allows you to view all of the HTML code, but none of the PHP code. Additionally, PHP must be live on a web server, unlike everything else we've covered. Everything else you could just embed in your HTML file, click to open it in a certain web browser, and you can view everything looking as it's supposed to. However, within our specific PHP, it does not work that way. It has to be uploaded to a web server. So basic HTML forms, they're pretty boring, they're limited, and it's hard to store info. If you will remember way back from HTML, within an HTML file, you just use the form tag to define a form, the input tag, and then the type attribute allows us to define a form input. And you could have button, checkbox file, etc. So here's an example of how you would set those specific inputs in HTML. Input type equals text. It allows us to create a single line of text input. Radio, checkbox, submit, button, etc. So here is an example of how you would utilize PHP within JavaScript. We copy our code, we input it into our WYSIWYG, we select run. This action underscore page PHP is our PHP file where all this information will now be stored. And when we click submit, it provides us with a response, all because that action underscore page.php file is uploaded to the WYSIWYG. So right now, by default, our values are John and Doe. We select submit. Your input was received as fname, first name for short, equals John, and lname equals Doe. We click that again and we change. Let's put in my first name and last name and click submit. And it now gives fname my first name and lname equals my last name. So slide 6 shows you a visual display of those input texts. See here, we have the input type set for text for both of them. And then slide 7 shows us the visual response we got when we put in that answer. So when you have any PHP form that's being used, form tag action attribute, and then equals quotes slash the URL of your PHP file in quotes, and then close out the tag. So slide 8 here shows us HTML with no PHP. It doesn't send our data we input anywhere because there's no where to store it. We don't have that .php file to tell us what to do with it. So in this example, this form would not work because on this line of code, what are we missing? Input type equals text, ID equals fname for short, value equals John. So what are we missing? If you highlight your text there, we don't have name equals fname. label for fname, we need to have it in this row as well to have it match all of our previous 2 lines of code. So on slide 10 here, we show how you would set up an input for a radio button. Additionally, on slide 11, you'll see the same for how you would set up specific checkboxes. To the radio button here, you'd have 3 buttons for the option HTML, CSS, or JavaScript as your favorite language. On slide 11, you'd have checkboxes next to your 3 options here. I have a bike, I have a car, I have a boat. You'd click the checkbox next to each one. On slide 12, we have listed here all different types of input types you can use within HTML. So we need to understand PHP a little more. It's a script that can be placed anywhere in the document using this bracket question mark PHP. You put in your code, close it out with a question mark in the closing bracket. More often than not, you're just going to store the PHP code in an external file saved as .php. A PHP file can contain HTML as well as PHP code. And here's a similar example as the one I showed you earlier with John and Doe. And here is how the PHP code would be set up. We're looking to see what the response is for name. We're looking to see what the response is for email. And we use our echo to display out whatever you were to put in for name and email. So here's an example of how that would be visually. So I put in my name, Matt, my email from Seton Hall, I click submit, it outputs them. The rest of these slides, 17 through the end of the slideshow, provide you with specific examples of the HTML file, as well as what's in the PHP file of how to do various things. So in this example, we have the HTML code for using PHP to upload files. Then on the next slide, we have what the code would be within the upload.php file. Slide 19 and 20, finish it out. So what is that specifically doing? Well, it's creating a target directory which allows us to upload that information. So basically, whatever file you were to upload, it's now stored in that specific directory. The target file is whatever file you chose to upload. So here's an example of how you would open and read using PHP. You find a file, whatever it is, you have R for read. If it doesn't work, it can't find that file, it'll say unopened to or unable to open file. Otherwise, it'll allow you to read it and then close it once you decide to do so. Similarly, you can create and write to a file using W within your opening of that file. So next you have here a possibility of creating a form. And it's similar to what I previously showed, where all the inputs, name, email, comment, are simply echoed out onto the screen as you put it through. You can do similarly sending email, but that's beyond the scope of the course. Now within slides 29 through the rest of the data provided, we have the 6 examples I've provided to you on Web Campus. So first, the HTML code here for echoing form data, then the PHP code that would be stored in the echo.php. Next, we have the writing form data to a file on the server HTML code. So this is what you're going to have to work on with your team assignment for PHP forms. In this example, you're going to modify this write.php using the full URL of my specific page. And then instead of label for name, what is your name? Label for year born, what year are you born? Label for favorite color, what year, what is your favorite color? You're going to modify them. So you might have label for, and then one group member's name, then label for another, then label for another, then label for the fourth one. And you would have to modify the input type and the name and the ID based on whatever the label for equals to. And in order for it to run correctly, you have to modify this to be the full URL from my domain, as I'll show you. And here is the full PHP code, which looks as such. So when you were to upload this, because of the way it's set up, it might not accommodate the fourth one that you add in the label for, but I can go ahead and modify my PHP code to adjust for that. Then slide 34 has the HTML code for uploading files. 34 has the PHP file that coincides for that. 35 and 36 are the vote example code. 37 and 38 are the birthday code example. 39 and 40 are the time stamps example. So as mentioned, your PHP Forms team assignment is going to be you modifying that specific version here on slide 31, 32 to accommodate 4 questions about all of your team members. So you'll see here exactly as described. If you scroll down, as promised, those 6 examples are there. So for you to click writing form data to a file on a server and open that, you'll see that specific example. And if you right click and select view selection source, you notice here that only the HTML code shows up. None of the PHP code shows up for that. And as always, if you have any questions, you're more than welcome to pop in to the weekly Teams meeting.